I've decided to keep a journal, to set down all my thoughts and the simple events of my day. I will keep this diary for 1 year, and at the end of that time, it will be destroyed.
Recently, I was able to see a movie by religious man turned film critic turned writer turned director, Paul Schrader. And if you don't know who Paul Schrader is, you probably know his movies. He's written some all-time classics like Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, The Last Temptation of Christ, and Dog Eat Dog.
Yeah, that wind really kicks up off of Lake Erie.
Three of Martin Scorsese's all-time classics are written by this man, and recently he started to venture out and do his own thing. He's directed a couple of terrible flops. He's written and directed a movie that's been ripped out from under him by the studio, and now he's directed what he considers to be his magnum opus, his masterpiece. So this is a movie that he had complete creative control over from the writing phase all the way to the editing phase. So if there was ever a movie that represented Paul Schrader, this is it. And it's one of the best movies of the year. First Reformed is a masterclass of direction, of pacing, of writing, of performances, and of structure in general. This is one of the best movies of the year, and everything across the board that it does is masterful. So what is this movie? Well, it stars Ethan Hawke, who plays Reverend Ernest Taylor, who is a reverend at First Reformed Church. And this church is sort of a tourist attraction of sorts. It brings in very few people for the weekly sermon, and is even called a museum and a gift shop at one point.
What's the play? What do they like to call it over there where you are? The museum.
The souvenir shop.
And Reverend Taylor, or Toller, I mean, is a very traditional man, and throughout the movie, his mind sort of gets polluted, if you will, by these progressive or even radical thoughts. And that's sort of the basic outline of First Reformed. It's just a super simple story that the movie manages to cram a ton into. For starters, I should say that this movie isn't for everyone. It's slow, it's challenging, and it's religious, which is a topic that by itself turns a lot of people off. And if you read the reviews to this film, it's pretty obvious that it isn't for everyone. And if you haven't noticed, it seems like half of everyone that sees this movie likes it, and the other half really doesn't, because of the ending, which we'll get into soon. But first, we should indulge in a little bit of context so that the ending can make a little bit more sense as we go through this. So the first thing we should talk about is the message of the film. I mean, this is a movie with tons of questions and ideas and themes, but the one that really strikes me when I watch this movie is the idea of man's connection with the real world, or the lack of connection, or the ignorance to the real world.
We have to be patient.
Well, somebody has to do something.
It explores the relationship between man and Earth, and furthermore, the ignorance that man has to obvious warning signs. There are many instances in the film where a character or characters see some obvious warning sign to something and do nothing about it. Ethan Hawke pees blood, vomits, and says he's so sick some days that he can barely stand. And yet he doesn't do anything about it for the first half of the movie.
I awoke at 3 with a cry. It's been 5 months since I sensed the first warning signs. I can no longer ignore my health. I've postponed my checkup too often. Yesterday, I could literally barely stand.
There's also a character that sees Ethan Hawke's obvious drinking problem and does nothing about it. Ethan Hawke sees a guy being assaulted on the street and does nothing about it. And the most obvious thing is that mankind can see climate change and does nothing about it. At first, I was sort of opposed to the overbearing amount of climate change imagery in this movie. I thought it could have been handled a lot more simply and subtly, but as I watch this movie more and more, it dawns on me more and more that this is an intentional choice made by Paul Schrader to enforce the message that he is trying to get across. Not only does this draw parallels to Ethan Hawke's mental state, which we'll get into more a little bit later, but it just berates the audience throughout the entire film with this imagery, showing us that it can make this blatantly obvious and will still do nothing about it, thus validating the message of the film and the film itself. Like I said, there's some other questions or themes in this movie, like the commercialization of religion or the juggling of hope and despair in our brains, but the idea that human ignorance to obvious warning signs seems to be the most predominant message here.
Hope and despair. A life without despair is a life without hope. Holding these two ideas in our head is life itself.
And this leads me sort of into the conclusion of the film, which is by far the most controversial part of the film, which is shocking in a movie that is all about religion and politics and climate change. Which means that this ending must be crazy, right? Well, not really. Every time I see this movie, even the first time, I feel like this ending is very cut and dry.
Am I to fear leaning on the everlasting arms? I have blessed peace with my Lord so near, leaning on the everlasting arms.
Many people seem to be under the impression that everything that's happening in these last few minutes is literal, like the rest of the movie. But I don't think it is. I think the last few minutes is just Ethan Hawke's character wishful thinking. I think he truly does kill himself, and the last few minutes is just his brain projecting wishful thinking so that he can die happy. I mean, we see Cedrick the Entertainer's character trying to find Ethan Hawke, and he goes to his little apartment, jiggles a handle, it's locked, he can't get in, so he leaves. And then, shortly after that, we see Amanda Seyfried's character in the room with Ethan Hawke, even though we just saw that it was clearly locked. So how did she get in? Well, I don't think she does. I don't think she even attempts to get in. I think from that point on, when you see Amanda Seyfried, everything is in Ethan Hawke's head. I think that she didn't get in the room, and that Ethan Hawke truly does drink the Drano, thus destroying the innards of his body and wrapping the barbed wire around his body, destroying the outside of his body in an attempt to make a statement about the connection between humanity and climate change. But he does this, and he actually goes through with it. I think he does actually drink the Drano, which kills him. And the last few minutes when he runs up to Amanda Seyfried and they kiss for an extended amount of time is just his brain projecting the happiest thing that it can think of for the time. I mean, it's kind of cemented in that you don't really hear them talk. Amanda Seyfried said something, but it's kind of inaudible and nonsense, and then they just run and kiss for such a long time, and then it just hard cuts to blackness, which enforces for me the jarring conclusion. It's such a jarring ending, which is the cut to credits, that it enforces the idea that Ethan Hawke's character truly does go through with the idea of killing himself, because we see his last moments, and as soon as he sees nothing, we as an audience see nothing, because the story's over, because our main character is dead.
No sooner than I shut my eyes, desolation came upon me. What is one's last thought as you pull the trigger? There goes my head. Or, Jesus, watch over me. Or neither.
When I first saw this just blew me away, this ending, because it's both hopeful and incredibly sad, incredibly morbid even, which is sort of an idea that the movie has going throughout it, but this ending, where it's so ambiguous as to what happens, even though it's really not, in my opinion, is perfect for what the movie is going for, I think. It enforces themes, it enforces ideas that it's going for, and it wraps up smoothly, nicely, with a happy image in a way. It has a happy ending in a way, while also being horribly depressing. The movie never asks you to sympathize with the character or to even accept the politics that it's putting in the film, because that's not what it's about. It's about this character, this man, Ethan Hawke's character, and that he's lost, and he doesn't have any cause. He doesn't have any life to live anymore. He's lost his family, he's lost his kid, he's lost everything. And he finally finds what he thinks is a just cause to seek after, which is him making a message or sending a statement about environmental change and hoping that this statement will do something, will cause some waves. And in actuality, it probably doesn't. And he sort of gets caught up in the very thing that he warns against. He lets despair take hold of him and in the end, kill him.
We can't know what the future will bring. We have to choose despite uncertainty. Wisdom is holding two contradictory truths in our mind simultaneously. Hope and despair. A life without despair is a life without hope. Holding these two ideas in our head is life itself.
And the movie just simply asks you as an audience to be mindful of these things. And for those reasons, I think First Reformed is an incredibly impactful experience that everyone should go see. So go see it. That's all now. Goodbye.